So tell me about Death at SeaWorld.
It's a book that traces over 20 years of fighting over this issue of keeping killer whales in captivity. And it follows the story of Dr. Naomi Rose from the Humane Society. She's one of the world's leading experts on wild killer whales, and now she's been working to fight against keeping killer whales in captivity. And it follows the stories of 4 former trainers who worked at SeaWorld in Orlando, including with this whale Tilikum, who has now been responsible for the deaths of 3 people, including, of course, Don Brancho in February of 2010, which is basically what got me started researching this issue, and has changed the landscape entirely in the whole debate.
How did Don die? Is she in the pool with the fish, or?
Well, they're not fish. They're actually giant dolphins. They're mammals. They
are.
Anything
that swims is a fish, as far as I'm concerned. But then that would make us. We swim. But
well, that's true.
I mean, go ahead.
Well, she was working with Tilikum after one of the performances.
What's the whale's name?
Tilikum.
Tilikum.
Yes, and it means friend, actually, in Native American language. He's a 12,000-pound bull, and she was in very shallow water with him on a ledge.
What Native American language?
Don't ask me to tell you which one. I think Chinook, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
It's in the book.
All right.
And the whale grabbed her and pulled her into the water, into deeper water, and dragged her down to the bottom and rammed her several times. At some point, she passed away during that incident, but he wouldn't let her go. And it took over 40 minutes to corral him into a medical pool where they could raise the false bottom up, and they literally had to pry her out of his mouth, her corpse, unfortunately.
But he didn't eat her, right?
No, they don't eat people. They're really not interested in people.
So he was just irritated about something.
Probably. The main show in the main pool that day had to be canceled right in the middle of the show because some of the other killer whales were acting up. Tilikum was in the back pool by himself, and he apparently was getting very distressed because he knew something was going on in the front pool. He was also in very poor health. He is still in very poor health. He was on daily medications. I believe he was receiving daily injections at that time. So when you're sick and you're tired and somebody's forcing you to do something you may not want to do, sometimes you get cranky. And when you weigh 12,000 pounds, really bad things can happen.
So they have the ability to form these kinds of thoughts and express these kinds of emotions and that sort of thing?
He was acting out in some way. He snapped. Now, I don't know if it was premeditated. We will never know what was going on inside his mind. But when you think about this animal that's supposed to swim up to 100 miles a day in the open ocean, that has very strong bonds with their family, most males stay with their mother for life, if you can believe that. They are extremely intelligent. They're fascinating animals. And to take a creature like that and lock it up in what is basically a swimming pool, I mean, it'd be like me never being able to leave this studio again for the rest of my life. I would go crazy.
Sure. Well, would you if
no
we
offense,
were promoting your book all the time? No, probably not, David. So 17 till the hour, talking with David Kirby, who wrote the groundbreaking book, essentially establishing the link between thimerosal and autism and evidence of harm, which was a great book. So I met David. His new book, of course, we're talking about, it's called Death at SeaWorld, and about what goes on there. So we got a bunch of fat, cheese-eating, Cheetos-eating tourists down there, dripping mustard from the hot dogs on their whatever, where they're fat, equally fat kids, watching these killer whales, and the attraction of capturing these killer whales and getting them in captivity is so they can tell the tourists that, well, here we got some killer whales, and look what the people can do with them. Is that it, basically?
Well, they are a big moneymaker. They're a huge attraction. SeaWorld apparently once estimated that 70% of all their revenue comes from these specific animals. They're spectacular, but I got to tell you, Don, I have seen them in the wild, and I have seen them at SeaWorld. There's absolutely no comparison. Later today, I'm flying out to Washington State. A bunch of people from the book are getting together on San Juan Island, and from the house where we're staying, the whales come by 2-3 times a day. They roll around in the kelp. They have fun. They spy hop out of the water. It's a spectacular, entertaining, very educational show, and it's free. And you don't have to pay $85 to get into SeaWorld.
And what else have we learned from this?
Well, we've learned.
It's clear now they're abusing the killer whales, and the whales are killing people. And what's been done about it? Anything?
Well, the U.S. government stepped in. OSHA slapped SeaWorld with a very severe violation and a fine. SeaWorld took OSHA to court, and they lost. The fine, the violation was reduced, but what they call the safety abatements are still in place. OSHA appealed that decision, and the commission that oversees this stuff decided not to review the appeal. They now have to go to the Federal Court of Appeals. SeaWorld has been busy installing things like false bottoms in their pools that can rise up if a whale goes out of control and grabs a trainer. Yeah. They can actually lift the bottom and try to rescue the trainer that way. But I don't think OSHA is going to certify that as being as safe as keeping the trainers out of the water altogether. So that's where the legal battle is now. Should SeaWorld be allowed to put their trainers back in the water, which they desperately want to do, or should they follow OSHA's mandate and keep them out?
Now, they have dolphins there too, right?
They do, in a different show.
What's the state of their deal?
Well, my research was specifically on orcas, but from what I learned, life for captive dolphins is not very pretty or happy either. Every species has its own adaptability to captivity. Some species do better than others. I haven't researched other kinds of dolphins in depth, so I don't want to go too far into it. I think if I did, I would probably come to the same conclusion as I have with killer whales. But killer whales are huge and very far-ranging and very emotionally attached to their families.
How large are they?
Well, they're the size of school buses, basically. Tilikum is absolutely massive, and he's not even the biggest. In the ocean, they get even bigger than that. So they can weigh up to 15,000 pounds or more. They're roughly 50, adult males, roughly 50 times the size of a human being. And they're extremely powerful, and they're extremely cunning and intelligent. And when they go off behavior, there's virtually nothing you can do to get them back under control until they feel like it.
So say we get Connell or Carly or somebody to read this book. What's the message they're going to get?
The message is that some animals are not suited to captivity, and this is one of them. They are more like us than we would ever realize. They have feelings, they have emotions, and it may be a wonderful show, and you may think that you're educating your children by bringing them to SeaWorld. You're not going to learn very much about killer whales at Shamu Stadium. In fact, I heard people leaving talking about the Shamu whales. Well, there is no such thing as a Shamu whale. So their education program is not exactly working. I think you cannot read this book objectively and walk away thinking this is perfectly okay. I support this 100%. And a new poll out by the Humane Society, the Whale Dolphin Conservation Society, showed only 1 in 4 Americans actually support this practice. And women in particular are opposed to it 2 to 1. I think eventually its time will have come, and it's going to go the way of the dancing bears and other things that we now think are just archaic.
How many killer whales do they have there in SeaWorld?
Oh, boy. There's 42 in captivity all over the world. I think SeaWorld has about half of those at their 3 different parks. They also own 5 whales that are on loan at Laurel Parque in Spain, and a trainer was killed in Laurel Parque on Christmas Eve, 2 months before Don Branchow was killed in Florida, with SeaWorld whales, SeaWorld safety precautions, and a SeaWorld trainer on the spot in Spain. After that happened, SeaWorld resumed water work right away, and 2 months later, Don Bradshaw got killed.
So, and as you said earlier in our conversation, talking with David Kirby about his new book, Death at SeaWorld, Don was not even in the water with the whale. Well, the whale grabbed a girl and jerked her in the water.
She was in a shallow ledge by the pool, and ironically, SeaWorld considers that dry work. So what she was doing was absolutely approved protocol, and I think that's what the judge thought was so negligent and willful, that they allowed a trainer to be in such a vulnerable position with a whale who had already killed 2 people. Common sense would tell you, you got to keep a little bit more distance. Dawn was an extremely talented and skilled trainer and experienced. She had been in that position dozens and hundreds of times before with Tilikum. And like I said, that day he decided to